permission to speak. Shadows hide you. I am listening. Our paths converge.
So good to see you.
Hail to you. Never lose hope.
Here, Fred Shaman.
I hear you. It has only begun. Fight on, friend!
Welcome to episode 466 of Coin Concede, a Hearthstone podcast dedicated to making the competitive side of the game more accessible to you. It is Thursday, September 26th, 2024, in the evening. Coming to you from Nomergon, Ohio, it's me, Edelweiss. From North End, Massachusetts, we have Wicked Good.
Hi.
From Teldrassil, California, we have Megesa.
Hello.
And from all around the world, we have you, dear listeners. This week's episode is brought to you by our producers, Number Theory, Kresh, Beef Squatch, David P., Walu, Jeremy T., Bottle Caps, Grumpy Monk, The Burger Club, Kirk Regan, Grizzly Bear, May, and SSJ5 Goku. And by our patrons of the week, Torby Flenderson and Jet Law. You can go to patreon.com/coinconcede to get perks like a thank you at the top of the show, early access to new episodes, one-on-one coaching sessions, and help support the show in the process. If you would like to support the show but cannot do so monetarily, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast feed of choice, as it always helps other people find the show. So, quick announcement. We have pushed back the next listener series, the Cash Cow Concede, by a week, just to give people more time to sign up. It's been a little light on signups. So it's going to be starting on Monday, September 30th. So you'll probably be listening to this a few days after today, the 26th. So maybe close to that date. But we should still be able to get you even if you're listening to it a little later than 9:30. So to sign up, go to discord.coinconcede.com and the Welcome Roles channel, or to our website's Listener Series sign-up tab. And if you're signing up past 9:30, also just do an at Listener Series admin in the Listener Series channel so that we can be aware and know to add you as a late sign-up. But that brings us to Life and Ladder. Megesa, you have the most exciting news, so welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, why don't you give us the rundown?
Yes, so I got married, as you probably know, but if this is your first episode, we're going to delay the Hearthstone slightly because I got married. And it's very exciting. It went really well. It was up in on the coast of Northern California. Gorgeous. It was super foggy and windy the day before, super foggy and windy the day after, and like gorgeous the day of, which was absolutely the opposite of what I was expecting. And kind of a little funky town. It's where my mother-in-law, I can now call her, lives. And we had sort of a full weekend up there. I had felt a little bad asking people to come that far. It's kind of a long drive from an airport. But people were mostly able to kind of make a weekend out of it. And so have a kind of family reunion. There was only a little over 35 people, and so I was actually able to talk to everybody, especially since I had more than just the day. And we fed a lot of people. My husband he cooks a lot for people as part of his day job, and so he's really good at cooking for armies, and he was like, I'm just going to do it. Everyone was like, but you're the groom.
Okay.
He's like, no, I'm just going to do it. So we packed 2 huge coolers and a little, like, portable fridge. I say little, it's not very little.
Nice.
And all kinds of stuff. We almost forgot the dress and tux, like not once but twice. And we would have had to drive all the way back for that. So we were like, as we're leaving the apartment, I'm like, wait, dress. And then we had to go to where he works to pick up more food. And then once again, after we repacked the car, almost drove off before I was like, wait, dress.
Oh my god.
But we remembered everything important. Forgot a couple of small things, but everything important, everything that couldn't be replaced, rings, stuff like that. And I was very pleased with the ceremony. My mom went like all out to decorate this little church. It's kind of a funky little church, and she made it nice. It had been quite the project for months, but it looked really good. She was able to draft my friend and my friend's husband to help her. So thank you to them for being drafted for like all day on Friday. And we had, I wrote most of the ceremony. I was happy with it. I'm kind of the writer in the group. And I mentioned Hearthstone in the ceremony, not by name.
Of course you did.
But there was a bit, I was like, we need a little bit of humor in this ceremony, because I'd written a lot of really like sweet things or kind of serious. So there needs to be something that's more humorous. So I was listing kind of ways in which our relationship is not always serious work, like silly things that we do to support each other. So I talked about how he learned to play Hearthstone so that I could talk to him about it, and he would actually be able to say, oh, that really is a cool play, right? Just like I have learned about like model trains and airplanes and things I previously knew nothing about. Although I still, like, he can look at like a grainy photo of an airplane. My half-brother actually tested this after I said it. He was like, I'm going to test this, because I had said, oh, he can recognize any grainy photo of an airplane and tell you what it is. So my half-brother's like, oh, I saw this on my way over here. Gave some context by talking about it, which my husband said was very helpful. And then showed the picture, and it was like super in the background of the picture that wasn't very good to begin with, and he got it. And I'm sure he was right. He could have said anything and we would have thought he was right, because we don't know. But I'm sure he was actually right. That's the sort of neurodivergent pattern recognition, can totally get it correct. I have different neurodivergent pattern recognition, not that one. So our rings are the Lord of the Rings ring. Like, they're from the company that did the Lord of the Rings rings for the movie. We looked this up as a joke, and then we said, those are actually really nice rings, though. They're actually really pretty. So we got an Elvish inscription on them, but they don't say, like, one ring to bind them. They say, we are a light for each other in the darkness. We dance together till dawn, and a single shadow make. So we thought that was very sweet. And because Elvish turns out to be super concise and dense, so it fit. They had a program that like turned it into Elvish. I'm not sure exactly how, because I'm actually more of a nerd of other fantasy than Lord of the Rings, but it's very cool.
So you'd say that they're an Elvish impersonator? Sorry, I couldn't not.
That's one way to put it. That's one way to put it. There was a family friend who was like actually a bigger Lord of the Rings nerd than us, and was disappointed that he was actually a bigger Lord of the Rings nerd than us. But he told us that we were getting married one day before Frodo and Bilbo's birthday. Because remember, it opens on Bilbo's birthday, and he's having this huge party. Yeah. And so our first full married day as a couple is Bilbo's and Frodo's birthday.
Apparently, Tolkien was like really concerned that people would be reading these books and be like plotting out the dates that stuff happened with like Frodo and Sam and Aragorn and Legolas, and be like, wait, the times don't match up. So he like poured over like when each particular thing was happening, so to try and make it so that if people were to compare like stuff happening on the separate journeys being described, that it would like line up appropriately.
You know what though? Probably there would have been people.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He's not wrong. It's just the do you care about it? I actually had a professor in my freshman year of college who gave us our first writing assignment was how many days pass in the first book of the Iliad? And the point was half close reading and half, oh, look, it doesn't actually work. I actually got it wrong, but I got close. I was like, this is actually really hard. And the reception was great, right number of people. Food was good. My husband had burgers as one option because that's what he wanted. The cake worked out really well. We did not, in fact, dance until dawn, so I guess we didn't really have truth in advertising on our rings there. People were like, it was like 8 p.m. and people were like, no, we're tired. And we're like, come on. Come on, guys. Not that, we should be more tired than you. We're the ones who've been putting this together. But I was able to get a few of my friends out on the dance floor long enough to feel like we did that, because I actually really like dancing. So, but yeah, overall, it was really nice. It's really, I'm glad that I was able to take just enough time off work that we could really like have it as a vacation, not exactly a relaxing vacation, but a very fun fun time to reconnect with people, and only mild drama, only mild things that I would have changed if I did it again, like maybe alter the flow a little bit, take a few more pictures. And we had a photographer, but for the parts where there wasn't a photographer, I have one friend who's really good at pictures and like no one else. So shout out to my one friend who was really good at that, but of course she's only in the place where she is. So the folder that we have with everyone's photos is quite skewed. She's like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to skew it so much towards me. I take lots of pictures and other people apparently do not, which I can't judge because I never do. People are like, are you going to picture of this? No, I never got a picture.
See, I'm old enough. Like Maureen and I have been married long enough that disposable cameras were still a thing when we got married. So we did the thing where you put a disposable camera on every table, and then you get lots of pictures because like people want to use those up, right?
Yeah,
They just had the roll because they had rolls of film. That's what we had to use to used to take pictures on kids before we had iPhones. There were rolls of film inside of these disposable plastic cameras, and then you used up all the pictures, and then you couldn't take any more pictures, and you had no idea what was on them until you went to get them developed.
That was fun growing up with you don't know what's on this picture until you get it developed, and then you get to find out all at once. Yeah.
And find out if you screwed some of them up.
Yep. Oh yeah, finger in front, I took a picture of you guys in front of the fountain, and it's like, nope. None of these are good. My husband did bring a little. He loves gadgets, so he got this camera that holds things really steady, and you can kind of like walk with it and move it around, and it's like super smooth. So he did take a walk around the reception at a couple points with that camera. So one of the pictures I have of Mia that I really like is actually just a still of him at our table testing the camera. And I have the only thing that I don't like about the picture, I have this thing we have of like this like fancy thing of fries in front of me that's like blocking half of me, but that's okay. They were really good fries, and they were totally a bad idea because like the grease like dripped down all over the white tablecloth. But
well, better that. I thought you were about to say onto the dress, and that would have been a disaster. So
well, I was pretty careful. There's some of the appetizers I was like, are we sure we should do this because people are in like dresses? And this one was like, well, they can take their chances if they want it.
Hey, look, if you're making the food, they go what they get.
Exactly. I didn't eat a whole lot because I was just like, I lose my appetite when I'm either anxious or excited.
Yeah.
So
both.
Both. So I didn't eat very much. I'm like, I told the servers, I'm like, it was really good. I just can't eat right now, but I promise it was good. So it was like this huge thing of pasta. I, of course, am a pasta person. But anyway, Hearthstone-wise, didn't pay attention to Hearthstone at all from the last time we recorded, Thursday the 12th, until this Tuesday. And I had gone all the way down to 4,400, which objectively is not, not that low a rank, of course, but was lower than where I had been before, but I was just like too busy to be worrying about it. And went from there, which was kind of fun almost because there were more people playing off-meta stuff at that rank than there was in like top 1K earlier. But I climbed back up to 2,600, mostly with Big Shaman, which we'll talk about later. And I faced this person named Cherry Blues a couple of times who was really into homebrews. They had what they called Demon Mech Squirrel, Aggro Mech Rogue, which was just like, if you haven't won by like turn 7, you just concede, but it had just...
I must have faced the same person because I was so confused. Like, seeing the, deal 3 to yourself and make 3 1/1s in the same as, making spark bots and putting down the mech squirrel and stuff. I was just like, what? What is this trying to do?
Maximum stats early, I think. And they also had a drum druid, but with dragons, that again was just like, it was less like turbo drum, the way that most drum druid decks are that I'm familiar with, and more just like maximum stats. And then you also have drum if you make it to turn 7. or you ramped a little bit with the Splish Splash Whelp. So that was fun, but I haven't had a chance to try it out yet because I wanted to play Big Shaman. I also have linked in the show notes, if you need a deck for the 15 mini set cards in casual, this is just Warrior touring into Druid with like all of the mini set cards from both of those, plus a bunch of neutral mini set cards. It'll take you 1 or 2 games. You just stall and play cards and then concede when you're done. So it's effective if you don't want to play something out of your way in Standard.
Well, Wicked, you had a somewhat different experience this weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, I also didn't eat very much this weekend, but that's because I was I don't want to say very sick because I don't want to be melodramatic, but I caught a fairly nasty head cold that was going around the house that went from Twinbee to Maureen to me. And I had told Twinbee last weekend that if she got me sick, I was going to haunt her. And and then she has been very worried since then that I am going to haunt her. Because I was not doing very well this weekend. I mean, I'm a big baby when I'm sick anyway. And like, usually when I get sick, because I have a CPAP, like if I get congested, I can't sleep. Mm-hmm. So that kind of spirals from there. Like I was sick enough that I didn't go to the game store to play Commander this weekend, which is very sick. So I did end up having my oldest drive me down there for her because she needed to practice driving and I wanted to pick up some cards from the new set. And the owner was very surprised that I was like, no, he actually was just like handing me a thing for the pre-release. I'm like, no, I can't stay actually. And he was like visibly surprised, but I'm like, but it was probably pushing myself too far to get there. But I had a lot of time to play a lot of games of Hearthstone, which was not a good idea for my rank because I was not playing well. I played I took a grand tour of the meta over those few days. I even played things like Pirate Demon Hunter and Token Hunter, and I played some Flood Paladin. I played a whole bunch of things that I do not enjoy and should not have been playing, but I did. I will partially blame Beef Squatch for this because I had a coaching session with them on Saturday morning, and we climbed like, I don't know, it was like almost 2,000 ranks into like between 2,000 and 3,000 with Pirate Demon Hunters. I'm like, okay, I can coach this. Surely I can play it. And it doesn't work that way. It never does. So my rank is not where I would like it to be at the moment, and that's okay. It's a combination of both being sick and also I'm still tired out from work. Like I took Monday off just because I hadn't slept very much, and like I was coughing so hard that I didn't really want to just talk through 8 hours of meetings because it was just going to hurt my throat too much. And then I looked at my out of office and realized that was the first day I'd taken off in literally 2 months. So that probably didn't help. So I'm hoping to get some time off over the next. I mean, I'm going to have to for the Jewish holidays, but I'm hoping to get at least a little bit of time off once things are actually settling. We had our first day with no critical issues on the board today, so that was a big milestone. So things are settling down, but it's still hectic, but I'm hoping to get back to normal fairly soon. And in my downtime, I picked up the TCG card shop simulator game that released this week. It's fine. You were either going to love it or you hate it. It basically is like Stardew Valley, but for a card shop and with a lot less relationships or socializing of any kind.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it's grindy in that it like makes you make the change for every sale, and then you have to go and restock the shelves constantly and stuff like that. So it's like you either really like that loop or it just kind of doesn't do anything for you. And I found after like 8 in-game days that it wasn't really doing anything for me, but I'll give it another try once it's very early access. Like it literally just launched into early access like a week ago. So I'll give it a few updates and I'll try it again probably and see how it goes. But it is a thing. If you are interested in that sort of a thing, it is in fact on Steam and it is something that you could try. And some people very much enjoy it. I'm just not one of those people, I think. So what about you, Edel?
That just sounds like work.
It felt like work. It really did feel like work. And part of it's also that the Steam Deck controls are not good. So it's like I'm having to like hover over with first person shooter controls, like hovering over the right bill in the cash register to select it to make the change.
Oh boy.
And it's just like, no, I'm not doing this. Like, that's okay. I'll wait. Yeah.
Well, I haven't really had much life stuff going on except that Leah got me sick. That's nothing new. That happens all the time. I feel you on the being unable to sleep while congested.
Yeah.
I have to like take Sudafed or NyQuil or something.
Yeah.
But in terms of Hearthstone, I hit a very late legend for me with Big Shaman. Basically, I have to thank Megasa for picking our Decksplanations this week so that I would actually play a reasonable deck and hit legend. Although I find myself in that position where it's like, I almost wish I hadn't, because if you don't hit legend, then it's just like, I wasn't playing much, I was lazy, whatever. But if I do, and the number isn't where I want it to be, then I'm like, well, now I feel like I have to play more.
Yep. And then you end up where I am, and that's not a great place to be.
So, yeah, we entered in like 6K, and I'm at 7 something now.
That's still better than where I am.
I usually end up more of 10x numbers in general, just because I try a bunch of weird stuff. But I just, the mini set and the balance, which we'll talk about, just haven't really done much to inspire me, and I am much more consumed with D&D prep. So that's just kind of where I'm at. I'm still playing Hearthstone. I still think the game's fun, but it's just I don't know. This set had a lot of promise for me when they announced the tourist mechanic, and then the way it actually played out just kind of didn't live up to my expectations, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that this meta that we just got out of too, like Big Spell Mage wasn't oppressive, but it was prevalent and it was incredibly boring to play against.
Well, it's like, do they have it?
Yeah,
right?
it's there's not a lot of variety. It's like, are they going to hit me on 5 with water elementals or not? And do I have something in my hand to deal with it or don't I? And that's not particularly exciting. Like, there's not a whole, I mean, there are things that you can do. Like, it's not like you have no agency. I shouldn't use that word because Lord knows. but it's not like you don't have anything that you can do to stop it. But it's also just kind of like, can I deal with this or not? And it's not. It reminds me of that meta where everyone was playing the kobold that would steal the other person's weapon because of the evolved shaman.
Sticky fingers.
Yeah, because that was it was like, do you have sticky fingers to take away their evolved weapon or don't you? Because otherwise you're going to get hit with a bunch of 8/8s, and then because so many people were playing it, that was just what it was, right? So yeah, I'm interested to see if the meta shifts in a way that makes it a little bit more interesting, because I think the meta has been very balanced.
Mm-hmm.
But balanced metas don't necessarily equate to fun metas 100% of the time, as much as people would like to think that they do. So,
well, and it's it's balanced in terms of stats for the different decks, maybe, but the matchups are polarized, and
yeah,
even within some of the games, just the way that Big Spell Mage operates is very swingy, right? It's like it could be generally favored for you, but they have the nuts and you just aren't prepared for that or something. A lot of times you're in a situation where you can beat one round of water elementals, but if they con man the turn after, you're going to struggle. And that's just, it's a do they have it situation. So, yeah, as you were saying, that's not like a fun play pattern to be dealing with.
I think there's been kind of like an orb mage coming up. Again, I just started repaying attention on Tuesday, but that might be a little bit more interesting to face against. Although I faced one of them yesterday.
I was playing it. It's
they
not.
had 3 orbs because they got a Tide Pool pupil, or I don't remember if they were running it or they got one, and they had Con Man. I actually managed to burn the other Con Man, so that was helpful. But I think their Sunset Volleys were hiding in the bottom of the deck is the main reason that I won, because it was only doing Tsunamis again and not also Sunset Volleys. But yeah, I did manage to win that game because Big Shaman can sometimes go really long, and it can deal with water elementals while I had a bunch of big stuff. More water elementals while I still had a bunch of big stuff. But if they'd had Sunset Volleys the whole time, or I hadn't burned their other Con Man, I was on the edge of what I was going to be able to deal with.
Yeah, the orb version is a better deck, but it's not more interesting to face, right? It's more interesting to play, maybe. And I do like it, right? When I was playing those kind of mage decks, right, I much preferred the orb version, and it was less popular then. But it has this flexibility of, well, you do still run clears in like Rising Waves and Star Power, with the idea being those will clear the way for your orb to kill them, right? With volley, with Tsunami. And but that just means that they have the flex of, well, if they're in a matchup where playing Tsunami again could close it out, they can do that, or they can save the Con Man for the orb, like you were saying. And, if they have it fully loaded, it's a ton of damage. And Rising Wave Star Power is very hard to put enough stats into to not take all that damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should probably talk about the meta that we're going into and the changes that happen, since we've already kind of started talking about it. So we can just go into that.
Gadgets and Gazette always gets the scoop.
All right, so as we had said, we do have patch 30.4.3 that just released today. It was teased on Tuesday. And the highlight of that is a set of 3 changes to standard. With the dev comment, this patch is focused on adjustments to the mini set. We have another patch window in a few weeks between expansion announcement and launch, where we plan to look at the meta more broadly. This meta introduced a major outlier, Big Spell Mage. Although some players enjoy the play pattern, the deck causes frustration due to how prevalent it is and how early it can get its power spike. The goal of these changes is to push back the average big spell turn a bit and to shave a little power from the deck while allowing it to keep its core functionality. With one mini set Taurus getting toned down, we wanted to give the other one some help so that players can try another fun vacation destination and make the most of what it has to offer. So we got 2 nerfs, both to Big Spell Mage. That is the only deck that got touched as part of this balance patch. So Portalmancer Skyla went from 5 mana to 6 mana, and Cephalopods went from a 5/6 to a 4/4. And then the one buff that we got was to Turbulus, the other new Taurus, the Hunter Taurus for Shaman. And that's going from a 4 mana 3/4 to a 3 mana 3/3. As a reminder, that the text on that card says Battlecry, give +1/+1 to all other Battlecry minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield. So it's Thursday night as we're recording this. So the nerfs happened approximately 7 hours ago. So I don't think that any of us has a good idea of what the meta is going to look like, but I guess thoughts on the choices that they made and I guess the choices that they didn't make.
I think the important thing is to try and hit the play rate of the mage.
Yeah.
And I'm a little concerned that what's actually going to happen is it's going to just specifically hit the play rate of the all-in Cephalopods one, which is technically worse, but and that people are just going to migrate over to the orb list and then still be playing it overly much. It's tricky because, well, I definitely think it's good to make Skyla a little later, right? Because that was the big swing turn. You don't want that happening too early. The weapon, usually they're getting 2 coins, which means they have 1 to ramp out with and 1 to swap with. So 6 mana is still kind of turn 5. And the piece of the puzzle that I'm starting to wonder if it was a good idea is actually what you said, Wicked, last week, which is the con man.
Yeah.
Which they changed it previously. How it was printed, it would not have had this functionality. And maybe that was correct.
Yeah.
It seemed fun and great when it was just Paladin, but now that it's doing Tsunami and Orb, I'm just not sure it's sustainable for the grievance levels, to use Zacho's language of players, because it just creates these scenarios where you're like, well, if they have con man, I lose.
Yeah, I think, and this is kind of one of the issues with Tourist as a mechanic, right? And I think that it's exacerbated by this mini set adding more tourists.
Yeah.
Where if you're now in the situation when you're balancing these cards that you need to balance them for 2 classes. And if you nerf it for 1, you're nerfing it for multiple. So like the fact that, and I don't know if this is really the reason that they didn't nerf con man, because and full disclosure, like we're in the creator Discord, like we have some advanced knowledge of, and are kind of part of an advisory group, and when they're kind of figuring out what to do, but they don't actually tell us what the final results are going to be, and we find out pretty much when everybody else does. And so like we don't necessarily know what all the decisions making was, right? So, and this never really came up. So I'm just kind of speculating, but like if you nerf con man, then you're making Paladin worse. And Pipsy Paladin is a deck that is using con man, at least in some builds. And that deck is kind of on the edge. So if you nerf Conniving Con man for mage, now you're hurt. You have collateral damage in a whole other class that didn't ask for it. And I, as a priest main who has been hit by dual class cards for other classes since, understands how that feels. However, like there's also the fact that they had to have tested this deck long before the buff to con man, and it was in whatever spot it was in, and they felt comfortable with that, presumably. And then they made this change knowing that Big Spell Mage was coming. And I don't know if they had enough time to really be able to retest all these things and then get this back to a good spot. But I just, like, the con man is the reason that deck is so boring to play against, because it's just the same thing over and over again. And I feel this with, like, I mean, this is kind of my original complaint about Shadow Step even, is just that one of the cool things about Hearthstone in a 30 card deck is that there's a limitation of 2 cards per deck, right? Of 2 copies of a card per deck, rather. And that kind of keeps some of the variety, which is, it goes to like Magic's four copies for a 60 card standard deck, whatever, right? So it's kind of limited to that, but that means that you're not seeing the same card over and over again, because that does get boring when you're just seeing the same thing over and over again. But when you're repeating these effects more than once, it does get very repetitive that you're just seeing the same effects over and over again. Because like you're not hitting anything other than Tsunami or I guess Orb with con man. It's always hitting Tsunami, or maybe it's hitting Sunset Volley. That's it. It's not like you're ever using that just to get another copy of a minion, like maybe in a desperation scenario, or if somebody doesn't know how the card works. But that's kind of where a lot of it just feels very repetitive, because you're seeing the same thing. And like some of these big flashy things, they get boring in repetition, and then that gets exacerbated by the mechanics of the repetitions within each game itself.
Yeah, I mean, even like con man on Norganon, which is not something I would have expected to see happen, but then ending up in these scenarios where it's like, okay, now they have multiple Norganons in play.
Yeah.
It's just it's the repetition and it's the mana cheat, right?
Yeah.
It's like, not only are they playing, I mean, in the case of Orb, this legendary spell a whole bunch of times, but they're cheating a bunch of mana at the same time. So they're getting to, you know, presumably if you've played Orb for 10 mana, right, you're still at 10. So you've got 6 mana left over after the con man to do something else. And it just compounds.
Yeah.
And that, I think, maybe if you want to keep the effect that Conman has for Paladin, I think you either take Conman maybe and like limit the mana that it can cheat by being like it has to cost this much or less. Yeah. Like the last class card you pass that costs 8 or less or whatever. Or you just make Conman itself a lot more expensive so that you can't curve it easily in Big Spell Mage. Like if you get out your thing on 5, maybe Conman it's like hugely expensive. It costs 7. It has a bigger body. That might kind of kill it though in the other classes if it's just that expensive.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those where it's like there's just not a great way to do it because it feels like, you know, they made the change for Paladin specifically.
Yeah.
You know? And now that Mage has it too, it just is out of hand. So
yeah, that's kind of my issue with it, and it's, I mean, I guess I am glad that they didn't try to buff a whole lot of other things, because this was a conversation in the Discord too about like, well, I wish there were more buffs, and I'm like, well, what are you buffing, right? Because like, a lot of the things that were in the mini set, I mean, we talked about that a couple weeks ago when we did our superlatives, but like a lot of the stuff was just kind of weird for lack of a better word.
Yeah,
and it's like,
exactly. Like, do we really want to buff the Paladin card that's like a spell that gives you 2 minions and they buff by each other's stats, but they don't go into play. They're just in your hand. Like, what do you do with that?
Oh, I did see somebody playing that in a hand buff Paladin.
Okay.
Which I guess is a thing that you can do, but I guess if you don't want to run Magatha for some reason in that deck, then that's something you can do. I don't know, but like a lot of the cards are just like they don't have support. It's not like they're like they'd be good if they were just like a mana cheaper. It's like there's not like that card that I hate in Priest, right? I forgot the name of out of principle.
Envoy of Prosperity.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I'm glad somebody remembers it because I refuse to dignify it by calling it by its name. But like that card is like, what do you do with it? Like, you're not going to make it a 5/5 like that's just absurd. And then like, you can't really make it cheaper. The problem is the effect. The problem is that there's an additional cost of losing a draw. There's not really a whole lot that you can do to buff it. So like a lot of these cards just like they don't really have enough support to make them playable. And also it's worth saying we lost duels. Twist is going to be closed for a while. And so there's standard and wild where we can use these cards. Like maybe in some other context, some of these cards would be more interesting if we had other contexts in which to use these cards. But when the only context that we have are standard and wild constructed, or maybe a tavern brawl here and there, then these cards have to be good in those formats specifically. And it's very hard to have all those cards be relevant in standard all at the same time.
Well, I also liked your point that buffs are, if they buffed outside of the mini set or stuff like that, there are things like I still want to see something to Shanty Paladin. I do get that Paladin is not a class as a class that is, it has decks that are playable and being played. The Shanty Paladin just seems like it would be really cool. And that it's close.
Yeah. And the mage. Right?
Right. And that mage. But I do think buffs are tricky. They could easily have gotten themselves in another situation where you overbuff something. I think they've kind of maybe are a bit wary of that because they've kind of already done that a bit recently. Yeah. And so it is fairly balanced, right? And there isn't like a clear, except maybe Shanty Paladin, I think there isn't as much of a clear, like this is a way that we could buff a deck into viability. And maybe when they were testing that, it didn't seem to buff it into viability, right? Like we don't actually know what their testing looks like.
I'd be very surprised if making sea shanty cost 8 instead of 10 didn't make it viable.
Well, maybe it made it too viable.
It doesn't, like, it's just stats in play.
Maybe something else is
they
coming.
They don't attack face immediately.
Yeah, it does seem like, how can this be worse than Big Spell Mage? Yeah. Which I think they also, they were trying not to kill Big Spell Mage, or maybe to encourage the orb build by hitting because I think, when you hit Surfalopod, people are like, well, I guess we just don't play Surfalopod.
Yeah.
So, and it seems like they successfully did not kill Big Spell Mage. Again, we're recording this 7 hours after, but.
Yeah, and the orb builds didn't even run Surfalopod. Is that all said? So,
that's why I feel like people will be more encouraged to play the orb builds, which might have kind of the opposite effect as desired. If people are like, oh wow, I'm actually winning more with this one I wasn't playing before, and I am playing now.
Right, yeah.
It's a better deck.
Oh, I hit Summoner's Ward on Norganon. Now I win. Okay, that's a win con. Like that's a thing that happens. I did that the other day. I killed somebody from I killed a Death Knight from 37 because one of my 2 spells was a Summoner's Ward, and they left the Norganon up, and then they realized that you should not do that. So,
oops.
Yep,
Oops.
that was a whoopsie.
Norganon's not a good thing to leave up anyway, if at all possible.
Yeah. But I guess what I'll say is that I do hope that when they do this more holistic balance patch that they're talking about next month, I really hope that, among other things, that they address Marin, because I feel like Marin is one of the things that feels most frustrating to play against, because it just every slower, and I say this as a control player, like every slower deck has some sort of comeback mechanism, because you can just cheat 30 mana and then get right back into a game. And it's like, it feels like you have to kill the other person, from high damage, or just don't bother, because all of a sudden Marin comes down, they draw 3 cards, they all cost 0, and inevitably they find some way to get back into the game where they had no chance otherwise. And I really would love it to be able to set up a 2-turn lethal more consistently without having Marin coming in just like is taking games that should be losses and single-handedly turning them into wins a lot of the time. That's how it feels to me, at least.
Well, and it feels a lot like, they Marin, and then you're like, oh, what's coming now? It depends a lot on what they hit. I mean, if they're a druid, they almost always hit something, right?
Yeah. But it feels like it's kind of out of your hands at that point, right? It's just like whatever the next 3 cards on top of their deck were is going to determine like the fate of the rest of the game.
Yeah. And sometimes you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then 0 mana ANR, and they refresh and just like keep going.
Oh, yeah. You're like, oh, the first one was, it was just a Splish Splash Swap. And then there was just a this. Oh, that was an ANR.
Yeah, it's like somebody feels bad after Marin was played, like almost every game, like one way or the other. So.
Right, because if you are playing Marin, and then you do get that one draw where you only got the Splish Splash Whelp and what are 2 other cards that you wouldn't want to get into in Druid? There's so many that would be fine.
Like Malfurion's Gift and like maybe like the Kobold, right? Like
yeah. Then the Druid is very sad. That might be what happened. Actually, you know what? That's probably what I had a Druid just mysteriously concede on me when they were totally not losing, but they had played Marin and played their wand, and I bet that's what happened to them. Like they probably hadn't even lost anyway, but they were just so mad that they didn't get to cheat any mana.
Yeah, fair. I mean, when you're queuing as Druid, you have certain expectations of how things are going to go. So, yeah. So, and then I guess Turbulus. I've been hearing tell of Elemental Shaman maybe being a thing with this change. We'll see. It's running some Reno Shamans.
Reno Shaman seems like it's a thing. Yeah, and
but it was fine in Reno Shaman before anyway.
Yeah. It did. Yeah. The actual stats on the cards didn't matter as much as it was just giving access to the Hunter cards.
Yeah.
So we will see what that looks like. There is a whole bunch of Battlegrounds changes. Again, we have a lot of other things to talk about, so I'll encourage you to go read through the show notes. I'm scrolling and kind of killing time to finish scrolling through them as I'm talking right now. So there's a lot of them. We're not really equipped to explain to you what's happening with Battlegrounds, but go consult your local Battleground streamer or go read through the patch notes and you will see all the things that are happening. But there are a lot of changes in this patch for Battlegrounds. So we have a twist schedule update as part of the patch notes. Twist is returning in December with patch 31.2, the first major content patch after the next expansion launch. It will return for 3 consecutive seasons based on the Wonders format, so that anyone who missed it the first time will have another chance to experience the twists. More information about the specific rules of each individual season will be shared closer to launch.
What's interesting there, I think, is that we know we're getting 31.2 in December.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this without knowing, like, I've not been told anything about this from the creator program or anything. That suggests to me that the expansion is probably in November, which means that it looks like they're giving themselves a chance to balance before the holidays, is what this looks like.
Yeah.
To me.
Good. Which is good.
Which is
I
good.
mean, it worked out. The schedule worked out well last year, so I think that's a good thing. I think that there's a fair amount of disappointment in the fact that Twist is gone for so long and is going to continue to be gone until December. And I mean, I understand it not being November is not the right time for it to come back, just because that's a new expansion launch. Nobody's going to care that much because they're busy trying out Standard and WoW with the new cards. And Twist is always going to be better as kind of an alternative format when you're bored with one of the other ones. But also, like, it's just weird that it's gone for so long. And then it's going to come back and it's going to be, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be exactly the same, because they do say that they'll have information about the specific rules, but it's very similar to something that we've already gotten. And I just keep going. I'm going back to that Tyler Beelman interview that Edel you discussed with Dawn the week that Magasa and I were both out, because there was a paragraph in there that I just want to read because it kind of sums up how I feel about that. But Beelman's vision for the future isn't solely based on plussing up existing game modes, though. While it's important to over-deliver where the players already are, he says the team also needs to continue experimenting to find the next big thing. The new Twist format introduced in May is a big part of that process. Twist is an event-based mode where the devs can try stuff without committing to an entire new game mode that may or may not be successful. I don't want to add another thing into your day-to-day play, Beelman says. If we ask you to come look at this thing, it's because we think it's cool, and probably secretly we're looking to learn something. These kinds of calculated experiments, along with the over-investing in the parts of Hearthstone that are already successful, are where the team will put their efforts moving forward. So maybe the rules that are involved in those new seasons are very experimental, but the rest of that wording seems to indicate that it's going to be very similar to the Wonders formats that we've already seen, which were not particularly successful. Mm-hmm. And really, it's excluding a lot of people from participating in them in the first place just because of collection. And I don't understand how that jives with the game director's vision.
I think maybe the way it jives with the game director's vision is if they're using this as an experiment to look at new things, it probably takes them even longer than we would think of to come up with a new thing that's going to be useful for them to try for something else, right? So maybe if they didn't give us this now, we wouldn't get Twist again until like well into next year. You know, like we don't know how long it takes really to get a new Twist out. Yeah. So I think they maybe have to choose some, and this is speculative, of course, but they maybe have to choose some between having long breaks versus having new things. I don't know that they're really making anyone happy with this.
Yeah.
Halfway each. Mm-hmm. They're also, the way that Twist would work is that it would, every time they have introduced it again, it has a spike, and then really, people who are playing at higher levels, especially the queue times, will get really, really long. So I think they might feel a little bit like if they just left it open, there would be hardly anyone playing in it, and at least this way they get the spikes when they reopen. So I don't know.
Yeah. I guess my feeling is that if they're going to be experimenting with anything, it's figuring out how to make the Hearthstone version of Magic's modern format. Right? Because we really do need something between Standard and Wild at this point. It's been 10 years. And we kind of need something that's in between. And they did one season of that at the very beginning in beta, and then they haven't gone back to it. And I would think that would be where some of that experimentation would go, just because we've lost duels entirely. I mean, Mercenaries, whatever. And Twist is kind of sometimes here, sometimes not. We kind of do need another format. And we don't there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of movement on that way.
They're planning something big for Arena, right? They've been saying that for a while. We'll see what that is. And I do think, I think what they need, if they're going to have an own format, they need more people. And I don't know if that's possible right now in the, they did put out a job notice for a senior designer and a senior narrative designer. I don't know if those are going to be replacing people who are leaving or not, but
they said growing the team, so
that's a good sign that maybe they do want to expand what they're doing, because I think, if you don't expand the resources, then there is a point to, we need to really just make sure that like the modes that we do have enough support. But it would be great if we had more different twists, and we had more twists. I just think that might be a little harder than it sounds. If they are going to bring a twist back, this is not the twist I would have brought back. I would have brought back the Heroes again, or like the original like Ashes of Outland one, rather than the Wonders format. But we'll see what they end up actually doing with it.
Yeah. So we also have one Hearthstone bug fix that there was a bug where Travelmaster Dungar could sometimes summon 2 minions from the core set. Probably was getting confused, that thought that they weren't the core expansions, that they were the original expansions they came from, because that seems to be something that bites things here and there. So they fixed that. There is one significant, they posted some additional known issues today, however, and there is one significant one that if you're going to dust a signature Portalmancer Skyla, it's giving the wrong dust refund. So,
oh no.
Yeah. So just be aware of that. If you have dusted it and got the wrong dust for it, they'll make you whole in an upcoming patch. But just be aware, if you do go to dust a signature Skyla, that you might get the wrong dust from that, and you might need to wait a little bit to get made whole. So the other news that we have is that there is a new event in the game that is the Travelmaster's Guide to Adventure. It's again another several week long event with weekly quests. The weekly quest is, as with the last one, is difficult. It is play 15 cards from the new mini set, which is more of a challenge than one might consider if you're not actively trying to do it. I have been playing since Tuesday, and I am still at 0 at 15. So you may need to be a little bit deliberate about that. But there's a new card back, there is a new coin, and then there is a Phelan skin and a Thunder King skin for Druid and Shaman, respectively. So you can go get those right now. They're, again, if you need a weekly quest, 15 card mini set deck, Big Asa has you covered in the show notes. But that is on now, but you are going to have to work for that. And even Ben Hearthstone, who normally flies through any content that they can put into the game, was saying that he was waiting for a reset to be able to finish one of the quests. So, and you're not getting very much. You're getting maybe like 5 gems or so a game. So just playing games is not going to get you there as quickly as you would like. You really do need to focus on completing the quests in order to advance.
There are some decks that will use 1 or 2 if you already want to be playing that, or, it doesn't take very long in casual. I know that's not the most satisfying advice, but it really doesn't take very long. And luckily, I did that today. The next weekly quest, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like play Rush and Wind Fury minions or destroy them. Like, you'll get through that. Okay. Right. So you just have to get through the first one.
And so the big Shaman discussion that we're going to have a little later will help you a lot with that. So that's good. So the other big news, that this is kind of themed to coincide with Hearthstone reopening in China as of Tuesday. So that is that they are now rejoined officially the Hearthstone universe. So they're no longer VPNing into foreign countries half a world away in order to play the game. So we're happy to have them back. The deck innovation is always better when the China region is part of the meta, even if it takes us a little bit longer to get access to their deck. So welcome back, China. And hopefully this will never happen again. But speaking of bad decisions in Blizzard history, there is a new book that's coming out in a couple weeks from Jason Schreier, who is a writer for Bloomberg, and I believe he was previously an editor at Kotaku, if I remember correctly. He's written a couple of other video game history books, and he's writing a new one on the history of Activision Blizzard post-merger. So basically the period between when Vivendi and Activision merged to when Microsoft bought the company. And there is an excerpt that we have linked in the show notes, and it is a doozy, and it effectively implies that Bobby Kotick was the reason that Mike Morhaime left.
Unsurprising.
Yeah, really. So basically things were fine until Titan. So there was a game called Titan in like the early 2010s that was supposed to be like another MMO that was effectively a successor to World of Warcraft. And that was canceled. That's actually what Overwatch ended up coming out of. They ended up reusing some of the assets from that to make Overwatch, but that game was like, it went on for years and then it eventually got canceled. And that's when Activision started taking more of an active role in Blizzard's operations, and particularly Blizzard's finances, and started bringing in a whole bunch of bean counters and other operations people that were getting in the way of Blizzard doing what Blizzard does. Ultimately, is the story of this excerpt. It does not paint Kotick in a particularly good light. It implies that the operations people that were in place were meddlesome, but were actually doing Blizzard some favors because the first guy was actually intercepting a lot of Kotick's really bad ideas, is what it seems to be implying. So yeah, it's an interesting read, and the whole book is coming out in, I believe it's the first week of October, so which it should be next week. Either no, or maybe it's the week after that it's coming out. But I already have it pre-ordered on Audible. I think you do too, Magesa. So we'll probably end up talking a little bit more about that as we get through it. But it kind of confirms a lot of our worst suspicions about how life was under Bobby Kotick.
I just want to read this paragraph from Shire's article where it says, before he became the charming and boisterous CEO of Activision, which produces the war shooter Call of Duty, Kotick skipped classes so he could focus on money-making endeavors and eventually dropped out of college. Morhaime, who co-founded and ran Blizzard, was the nerdy, introverted student who sat in the front row and cracked open VCRs after school for fun.
Yep.
When they were fully grown, Kotick went to celebrity parties in the Hamptons. Meanwhile, Morhaime called up his programmers to ask about changes he'd noticed during late-night sessions playing StarCraft 2. Kotick maintained a private art collection worth millions of dollars. Morhaime's house tiles were inscribed with insignias from World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
Just like stark contrast.
Exactly.
And that's why people loved pre-Activision Blizzard, right?
Yeah. I mean, the founders of the company wanted to make games, and they like, and he even comes out in this excerpt and says like Morhaime was not like somebody who was against money. Like, he was very much, in favor of making profits and wanted to make profits, but he wanted to do it by making games, as opposed to, Kotick, whose initial reaction was basically like, how can I milk the most possible money out of every single IP that we have, right? Like there's the one reference to Hearthstone in this article is talking about how once the bean counters started coming in, they were asking questions like, why weren't people buying as many packs as they thought that they should be, for instance.
Yeah. It reminds me of a stark contrast in a similar pairing, which is Larian versus Hasbro / Wizards.
Yep.
I blame Hasbro, to be clear. But Larian makes Baldur's Gate 3 Game of the Year, amazing, high fives all around. They say, we're not going to work on another D&D property ever again.
Yep.
And meanwhile, Hasbro's like, awesome, sweet, Game of the Year. Okay, we're laying off like a whole bunch of staff who worked on the game. Like, Larian makes good games because they have people who have been making RPGs for decades, right?
Yeah, they keep people.
They I'm sure didn't need to find people who had played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. I'm sure their people all already had, right? So these people just have tons of experience making RPGs, and that's how you end up with a Game of the Year like BG3. But the way gaming companies do things in the States is just there's this churn, right? People end up bouncing between companies because they get laid off by one, go look for work at another, and it does not lead to the cohesion that you need to make really good games. So we all have memories of these awesome games that came out from smaller companies.
Or Nintendo.
Or the early days of companies we knew, right? And then now we look at those companies and they're run by different people. They have, different motivations coming from on high, and it just makes the quality worse, right? Outside the gaming industry, you've got that with Boeing, right? Like, it's very clear you end up with worse products when the only motivation is money.
Yeah. Well, when you're starting something, especially something like games, I think maybe, not every game, but like a newer game company or some game companies, they always want to make a profit. They're a for-profit company, but they wanted to make a game. Like, you don't do an indie game studio if you don't want to make games. Mm-hmm. If you just want to make money, you do something else. But once you're a large company, you're beholden to your shareholders, the, people who are in charge, they are there to make money. That was why they were hired. Like, that is what their point is. Apparently, though, there is a lot more stuff about Hearthstone. There's a whole chapter about Hearthstone in the book. According to Jason Schreier on Twitter, he says, including the story behind why the top creators left. I would assume that means like Ben Brode. And then he says, here's another fun tidbit. During the course of development, director Eric Dodds wound up failing the, quote, judge test for the World of Warcraft TCG because it was so convoluted, and he loudly declared to the team, paraphrasing, "We will never make a game with these rules."
There. So, yeah. So, anyway, so that's going to do it for news, but we do have 2 weeks of tournaments because we didn't want to do it without you to help fill in all the gaps, Magesa. So we skipped on tournaments last week, and so we have a lot of tournament news, so we should go get to that right now.
It's the Grand Tournament!
So, we did have a couple of tournaments this week in terms of, there was the Solary Party that we mentioned, and also our listener series. I've got to admit, I was not able to catch Solary Party myself. Just been kind of in my own world. But Wicked said they were doing best of, what did you say, 11?
11. Yeah, one of each, one deck for each class. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
That's why I couldn't find a deck list.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. Yeah.
So, I don't know if it was, exactly like the sort of format that I did for WSOE or some variation, but yeah, that does seem like it would go quite long, which I did not realize. But we ended up with Gaboom taking first, with Jambre taking second, followed by third and fourth, Vins and Fino. So, names we know. And then rounding out the top 8, Baby Bear, Otsuna, Black Widow, and Abstain. And then, yeah, everyone else, got 9 to 12 and 13 through 16. But usually we tend to only care about the top 8. That's just how it goes.
Harsh.
Well, look, when it's an invitational of only 16 players, then...
Yeah, I mean, when there's not that many players there, then, yeah, we can limit it to the top 8.
Having personally been like 17th in a tournament before, where it was like you needed to make top 16 for something, I forget. Yeah, it's just the way it goes.
Yep.
But to, of course, the really important event that happened, which was the conclusion of the Coin Concede Listener Series, All You Can Beat Buffet. We would like to congratulate Jolt C and Book for making the semifinals, and Dr. Bomb D for second place, and Pilot for the win. So, in terms of lineups in the top 8, decks were submitted a few days after the mini set and a lot of people seem to be trying to target Big Spell Mage, but only 2 brought it, which I honestly, that checks out, because it's one of those things where like it can blow people out of the water on ladder, but particularly if you're not doing the orb version, like its win rate is not what you want for a tournament. So, yeah, but to that end, we had 5 Pain Locks, 5 Big Shamans, 4 Pirate Demon Hunters, if you're sensing this is the countering the Big Spell Mage, 3 Tempo Druids, those 2 Big Spell Mages, 1 Blood Decay, 1 Double Rainbow Decay, 1 Token Hunter, 1 Reno Druid, and 1 Reno Warrior, which is a bold choice, but, some people really like it. In order of finish, lineups wise, we had Pilot was on Pirate DH, Big Spell Mage, and Pain Lock. So maybe it was the bring since he won it all. But Dr. Bomb D on Pain Lock, Big Shaman, and Pirate DH. Book had Reno Druid, Big Shaman, and Pain Lock. Jolt C with Big Shaman, Tempo Druid, and Tourist Pain Lock. SSJ5 Goku on Blood Decay, Big Shaman, Big Spell Mage, Y the Hunter, Token Hunter, Pain Lock, Pirate Demon Hunter. That feels very on brand, having both hunters. Bongwater had Tempo Druid, Double Rainbow Decay, and Reno Warrior. And then Proby1 with Pirate Demon Hunter, Tempo Druid, and Big Shaman. Highlights. World 8 and Tex Mahani cast the finals on World 8's Twitch channel. So if you are curious to see how that played out, go ahead and check out the VOD at twitch.tv/World8HS. It's a fun watch, and we appreciate them casting it because we have been occupied. The first game in the finals was a lightning fast aggro mirror with Dr. Bomb D on Pirate Demon Hunter and Pilot on Pain Lock. Yeah, that'll do it. Pilot had a very aggressive start with turn 1 Blood Treant and Party Fiend into turn 2 Coin Ticking Pylon Ziliax.
Okay, that'll work. Yeah, that's one way to do it.
Doc was slowed down, but able to decisively retake the board with Hot Coals. So that's not an always inclusion in Pirate DH, but it came in clutch, it sounds like. Turn 6, Doc had a Hosen and Spirit of the Team on board, another Hosen, Adrenaline Junkie, and Hot Coals in hand, needed 9 damage to win, and if he didn't find it, it was dead on board. Didn't quite make it, though, so it looked like it was one off lethal. Always tough to be one off lethal. And then in SSJ5 Goku, not SSJ5 Goku's game, but something he pointed out in the Discord, was that Doc had forgotten to count that Hot Coals would also have killed Pilot's Geode, doing 2 additional damage. So it could have been lethal. But it's always hard to check stuff like that. You know, when you're counting lethal, you're usually counting all the things that you are pointing at the opponent's face, not the things that they're pointing at their face. You know, it's like when you don't realize that if you leave up their cursed minion, that they'll die because it'll deal 3 damage at the start of their turn.
I'm always pleased with myself when I remember that because I so frequently do not.
Yeah. And, in this case, the casters missed that as well.
And so did I. I was sitting there watching it. I totally didn't see it until after the game.
Yep.
It's okay. You're not officially a caster until you've missed lethal on stream at least once. So
exactly. Yeah. Or, all the time. In the second game, Doc decisively smoked down Pilot's Big Spell Mage with Pirate DH. That's why it was there. But in the third game, Doc was favored on Big Shaman, but Pilot played aggressively, and Doc drew all the patches, getting only Dazzlers off of Cliff Dive, which isn't quite enough. Funnily, I don't know if this was intentional, but our Decksplanations is actually on Big Shaman, which How it goes in tournaments, I don't know, but how it goes on ladder, pretty well, I have to say. Given that Megas and I both used it to climb recently, and there's a couple interesting lists. So let's get into it.
So Big Shaman, you don't usually draw all the patches because there's quite a few patches. So you usually draw some and not all of them, and it's great. It is a really fun deck. And it was when we were thinking about what do we want to do for Decksplanations, what can we play now to feel good into the meta, what will probably still feel good even after changes. And that's something a little bit different because the other things I thought of were like, yet more aggro decks. And I thought, I always talk about aggro decks. Let's talk about something else. So you've probably seen this deck around by now, but basically the elevator pitch is you have a lot of different good packages in Shaman and synergies to give you this, dare I say, mid-range deck that can spike, can also go pretty long. I've had, 13, 14 turn games with this that I've won as well. You've got big defense with the Cliff Dive. Basically, you have a lot of big minions and Cliff Dive, because you're touring into Demon Hunter. You also have Horn of the Windlord and things to buff your attack to get some over-the-top damage. You also have Cookie, because you have to, because you're, but also he can be good, especially with Sigil of Skydiving. And then you have Muck Pools to evolve something that you get off Cliff Dive so it doesn't go back in your deck, and you have something big there, for example, or just evolve anything as you're going along. And of course, you have Dazzler. Even though it is a bad hit off of Cliff Dive, it's just such a good card. You already have stuff from all the spell schools, pretty much. You're not unhappy to be running any of that. And so that can be a big spike. You have Hagatha, because Frosty Decor and Cliff Dive with Hagatha are even better. And so there's just a lot of different synergies interlocking. Very clever deck. Originally comes from Jombray, as far as I'm aware. Vicious Syndicate picked up his list. At least that list is from Jombray. I don't know whether or not, like, the archetype, but I wouldn't be surprised.
No.
Yeah. One thing I want to note is that although it sounds like it's terrible to have Razzle Dazzler in here, there's only 3 Battlecry minions, so Fairy Tale Forest is going to find you Hagatha or a Razzle Dazzler, so it's built in such a way that your second Fairy Tale Forest is basically always dead. but the first one is really good because you're pulling these bad hits out of your deck for Cliff Dive, and the odds of you hitting them and having them in hand before you play Cliff Dive are usually pretty high because of Fairy Tale Forest and natural draws.
Yeah. I've 2 Razzle Dazzlers. I think I've only seen in that one game where poor Doctor BOND did not get the good end of that. But generally, that's unlikely to happen.
Cookie and a Razzle Dazzler will happen somewhat frequently. Not frequently, but that happens a little bit more often just because you don't have a way to tutor Cookie out typically. So Cookie sometimes is one that gets pulled out, though. That's not always terrible, because sometimes if you pull Cookie out with something else that can attack, like not the Kolagarn, but like if you can kill off the walking mountain, if there's enough stuff on board, then Cookie can still transform that without you having to use a Muck Pool. But Cookie sometimes is a pretty big low roll on some of those Cliff Dive pulls.
I did have one game. It was early on when I was playing this. I can't remember exactly what it evolved into, but I pulled Cookie and the Dazzler. I'm like, oh darn. I think Goku was spectating me at the time, so I messaged him like, come on, really? Then I ran in the Dazzler. It gave me that 7/6 rush from Warrior.
That's pretty
good. And then
good.
when that died, it gave me another rush.
Oh.
And then I ended up with like some 9-drop. And I was like, okay, this worked out after all, actually. I think maybe like the 9-drop with taunt. Like I needed a clear. I needed my walking mountain. I didn't get it, but I sort of got it anyway. So you just need you just need really good rolls, apparently, when you get the... although Goku pointed out I should have just run the Cookie in to clear one last thing, because I didn't want to pull it again with the next cliff dive.
Right.
So I did actually, because one thing, if you haven't played with this, with the cliff dive, if the minion dies while it's out there, it's dead. It can't go back in the deck.
Dies or transforms.
Or if it transforms, it stays out because now it doesn't have that enchantment on it. Basically, the minion comes out with an enchantment on it that says at the end of turn, go back into the deck. So if it transforms, it loses the enchantment. If it dies, it loses the enchantment because it's no longer there. If you buff it and then it doesn't die and it goes back into the deck, it will lose that buff. I found this out because I generated a Therazane randomly somehow through muck pools, I think. And the Therazane died and it buffed my walking mountains. So my walking mountain was super huge when I pulled it with cliff dive.
Oh, no.
And then when I drew it naturally, it was no longer huge, which makes sense because it went back a zone, right?
Yep.
But I was sad. I did, however, have the other one in my hand still. So it turns out paying full cost for a walking mountain when it has 8 attack is fine and 32 health.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that seems okay.
We can pay full cost for that. Sometimes in long games, you are paying full cost for these things. But in short games, you are not. You are cheating them out. So there is the sort of most popular list was sort of that original John Bray list that was featured in the last VS report, which was was last week because of there was a change this week. There's also been that original list has Kolagarn and Thrall's Gift in it. Some people have been experimenting with cutting one or the other or both of those. So I was playing some with World 8's list, which puts Sea Giants in. Because they do get rushed when they're pulled out with Cliff Dive. So an 8/8 rusher is not terrible. And if you draw it naturally, there's often a lot of minions on the board. You can often just get it down. If you do draw it naturally, it's not dead in your hand. And if you muck pools it, it's a Chained Guardian.
Yeah.
Every time, consistently. So that's been feeling really good. John Bray was experimenting with a factory assembly bot.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So Factory Assembly Bot is the 10 mana 6/7 that summons another 6/7 to attack a random enemy at the end of turn. It also has miniaturize if you play it naturally, but who's doing that? Not you. You're getting it off Cliff Dive. So you still have that 6/7 that it summons stays, attacks, and then stays on the board. And the only one that this was apparently what he brought to Solary. I couldn't find his list from Solary. I found one on HS Guru that also had a chill vibes in there. Pizza popularized a list that cut the Kolagarn for an Ice Crown brochure and also cut a Turn the Tides for an extra Thrall's Gift. I could actually see the Ice Crown brochure because it's a frost or a fire spell.
Yeah.
It kind of does the same thing as Turn the Tides without overloading you. That overload on Turn the Tides can be quite annoying if you don't plan for it carefully. So,
but also it doesn't give you the burst when you have the Horn of the Windlord. So there's
but it doesn't give you the burst. I think that's probably part of why he didn't cut both Turn the Tides.
Yeah.
Also because if you cut both, you don't have enough nature spells, maybe.
Yeah. Well, you still have the pop-up books, so
right. You do still have 2, so you do still have some nature spells. Micaiah Time was experimenting with Ice Crown brochures, as well as Wave of Nostalgia instead of Frosty Decor, which is a bold move. I played a little bit of it, and it did work out for me one time, because you do sometimes have little tokens from like Sigil of Skydiving, from the Cliff Dive, from Turn the Tides. But you can only play it. The problem that I found with it was you can only play it some of the time, whereas Frosty Decor is like, if you're just sitting there on 5, you're like never that unhappy to play Frosty Decor, and sometimes you're very happy to play Frosty Decor.
I'd sooner run ETC if I'm going to do that.
I generally want to curve Hagatha into Frosty Decor, which you can always do, right? Whereas you cannot always curve into Wave of Nostalgia.
Like, at least if you do it with Hagatha, it gives you an extra legendary minion because of the slime. Like, the slime goes on the board, then it casts Wave of Nostalgia. It does give you that minion. I did try it out and it works that way, but like, you still can't do it every time on 5. Like, most of the time on 5, you probably can't do it. I think maybe Micaiah Time was thinking that like we're already pretty good against aggro, but the Frosty Decor can be good against other decks too. Like, it's just a huge wall. If you're facing like a hand buff paladin or a weapon rogue or like all kinds of things just get frustrated by these 2/4 taunts. There's a lot of times it bridges you to your turn 6 when your power plays come online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can heal a lot off the cliff dive if you hit a walking mountain. So or even just hitting a Golganeth sometimes is enough healing.
Yeah. Yep.
Or even a horn can be clear occasionally. I ran into a couple of hand buff paladins with buffed titans. And a thing to remember about the buff titan, you cannot clear it with a horn swing because it sets itself to a 3/3 and then it can only take 2 damage, so it becomes a 3/1 after you hit it. If you hit it again, it will reset to a 3/3, become a 3/1 again. So don't do that.
Yep.
But you can still hit it to get it down to 1 health, then run a minion into it.
Yeah.
So like it had like 14 health. I got it down to 1 by hitting it with the weapon and then ran a minion into it.
Or a malted magma or a pop-up book, or you have a lot of ways to get rid of like lots of little minions. Yeah.
So that is a sometimes, obviously, ideally, you're sending your horn on the Windlord face, but don't forget that it is also a removal tool, which is sometimes important. You just have lots of removal. Yogg Saron is a very powerful thing to pull out with Cliff Dive. And so essentially you get to Yogg multiple times often if Yogg doesn't like destroy himself.
Yeah.
After.
You don't want to evolve Yogg. Right? Like generally the things you want to evolve that are coming off the cliff dive are the ones that are awkward to play and don't really do anything. Like the walking mountain, like you almost always want to evolve that if you get it. Like if you get a Razzle Dazzler, you probably want to let that go back in the deck unless you don't think the game is going to go that long. But that and certainly the Kolagarn, right? Like the Kolagarn is something that if you're playing that in the deck, you want it doesn't really matter. You don't have to evolve it because it just not being on the board means that its Death Rattle will never trigger and give the minion that you stole back.
But if you play it from hand, you definitely want to evolve it.
Then you absolutely need to. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because you can almost never use the thing you stole that turn. So then that gives them a whole turn to clear the Kolagarn. And then if the thing you stole had a battle cry, they're like, great, thanks for giving it back to me. I get to play this again. So that was one reason why I tried out doing the Sea Giants instead of Kolagarn, because sometimes I would get stuck in a control game with Kolagarn in my hand, unable to use him if I didn't have a Muck Pools also. But if you do have a Muck Pools, Kolagarn can be great in those slower matchups because you're running out of stuff, you steal their thing. So
yeah, I definitely enjoyed having Kolagarn in the deck. I have only played that original Jombre one that's on VS. I am curious about some of the other ones. Certainly, always evolving Sea Giant into Chain Guardian seems fun. Yeah. The new Jombre list, ignoring the factory assembly bot, I'm kind of wondering if the one chill vibes is because of the rogue deck that is maybe happening more now that there's fewer water elementals out there.
That's not a bad idea, actually, just because like the weapon rogue is it's really rough. And even just like any of the aggro decks, right? Like this is much more. I mean, you can actually, I guess you can deal with the aggro decks.
Yeah, we're actually favored into most of those.
But the weapon rogue is rough just because like you don't interact with what they're doing and like you make taunts, but not enough taunts, and they still have tar slicks
and too late.
Like yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, with something like that, you want to turn on wider pressure, right? Like you're trying to go for your Dazzler turn. And the Frosty Decor can definitely, like I found when I faced the weapon rogue, you really need like Frosty Decor and or the pop-up book. They can often deal with one taunt, not two on the board at the same time.
Yeah, they have backstabs, they have tar slicks, they have fan and knives, so they can deal with them, but yeah.
Maybe I just got lucky most of the times
that I'm
saying
it,
but you can put on the pressure with the Razzle Dazzler. I don't know. It looks like it's an even matchup on HSR. I don't know how big the sample size is. I think it just depends on who gets what. I
did try the brochure version. The brochures felt mid, and I did miss the Thrall's Gifts because Thrall's Gift just gives you an alternate win con, which is that I've got a bunch of garbage on the board and I can Bloodlust, which is something that comes up not infrequently. Like you end up with frogs, you end up with just like hero powering totems. Sometimes you've got like half of a Frosty Decor left, or Cookie sticks around, or You have like the 4/4 body from the Razzle Dazzler or whatever. Like you just have like a bunch of garbage, and you can turn that into lethal if you have the Thrall's Gift. Not having that, like the brochure was fine, but it didn't really do enough a lot of the time compared to just that kind of utility. Also, having access to the Hex or even the Lightning Storm is generally is much better than whatever the brochure is going to do on any given turn.
I mean, I think the brochure is better like early game, of course, because like you can play it early. You would never play the Thrall's Gift early. I did find I was mostly using it for Hex. Maybe because I wasn't thinking enough about Bloodlust, but Hex could definitely still be useful. And occasionally for an extra clear, or you combine that with like Golganeth or something. Although Golganeth only discounts the first part of the Thrall's Gift, not the actual Lightning Storm, but still. You can combine it with some other clear to get rid of a bunch of water elementals or whatever. Yeah.
Or you're getting rid of, if you're against a druid, you're getting rid of a Fi, you're getting rid of a non-Unkiliac Ziliax. You know, those sorts of things that are going to lifesteal and get you out of range of being able to kill them with the weapon. Like that, it's useful for those sorts of things a lot of the time.
Well, we've talked about some of this, but in terms of your macro game plan, you kind of have a lot of the skill on the deck, I think, is piecing together what you're going for. Like, what do you want to do first on turn 6 in this matchup? Depends also what's on your hand. But, you know, are you going for Dazzler first? When do you get the horn down? If you get, you know, you often, unless it's late game, you need to set up the horn before you play like Skirting Death or Turn the Tides. So you need to find the time to do that. But I have when I started playing this deck, I would hold the Dazzler too long. I'd be like, I want to really like play all the spell schools first. Like, you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
If you can, leading up to turn 6, go slightly out of your way to play a different spell school so you get an extra 5-drop. That is great. But it's turn 6. You are mostly choosing between Dazzler or Cliff Dive, mainly depending on whether you have a board to clear or not.
And how much board space you have, right? Like, that's the other consideration. Like, sometimes you stuck a Frosty Decor, you've got 2 locations on board. Like, do I even want a Dazzler? Right? Because if you're only going to get 2 minions out of the Dazzler, you may as well let them clear the board first and then play it afterwards for reload. If you're gonna be missing out on minions, right? So
it is good for early pressure, but it's also good for reload. So you can actually keep going for quite a while. Sometimes it's worth looking at a board and saying, this is not going to kill me, so I'm going to Dazzler, because we have a lot of healing with like Walking Mountain, with Frosty Decor. It's not a lot of different cards that heal, but it's like a decent amount when they do so.
Yeah.
So
and Golganeth.
And Golganeth, yeah, it's non-trivial also.
Yeah. I think you kind of said this, but just to put a finer point on it, like, most of the spells in the deck have spell schools, and if you're just looking to like, if you're just building up to Dazzler on 6, like, it's fine to just rip a Malted Magma on 2 if you don't have anything better to do. It's fine to just use a pop-up book to go face if it's a deck that's not likely to have small minions, right? Or even like, if it's early and you have a Turn the Tides on 3, like, and you need a nature spell, it's okay to play that. Like, spending the first, because you're not doing a lot on your first couple turns anyway. Like, you know, turn 3, you want to be playing the location into turn 4 Hagatha, but that doesn't always work out. And you're not doing really a whole lot until 6 anyway, but 6 is the turn that you need to be planning for. And then particularly if you're planning on cliff diving, like, you want to look at your muck pools, making sure that's open on 6 if you're going to be cliff diving.
Make sure you don't Turn the Tides on 5. Right?
Yep, that's that
like,
thing too.
When are you playing that?
Yep.
Or sometimes you might be aiming for your Dazzler on 5 if you got it off the location. So make sure you're not Turn the Tiding on 4 if you want a Dazzler on 5 or you want a Frosty Decor on 5. So actually, Turn the Tides on 3 is often a good idea. Yeah. Unless you have a 4-cost Hagatha in your hand.
Or a location that you'd rather spend the 3 mana on.
Yeah.
Well, but you can Tides on 3 and then location on 4.
On 4, yeah.
So that you are not overloaded.
And then Dazzler on 5 if you got the Dazzler. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you have a better, 2 and 3 chance if you haven't drawn any of them of getting a Dazzler. Yeah. I'm skipping slightly, but, in terms of Mulligan, right, anything big, you wouldn't really want it anyway, but you especially don't want it when the whole point is that it gets drawn out of your deck with Cliff Dive. So, Don't keep that. Pretty much the keeps are Sigil, Hagatha, both of the locations, especially Fairy Tale Forest. And Pop-Up Book can be a good keep as well. It's like the 5th here. But situationally, you could keep Cookie like if you have Sigil skydiving, because that's a really good 2/3. You could keep Magma if you're facing Token Hunter, right? Like it's a hunter.
Yeah.
Maybe keep Magma. But mainly like your best are Hagatha is the best one, followed closely by Sigil of Skydiving in the stats, followed fairly closely by Fairy Tale Forest. Like you don't want to keep even like Frosted Decor, you'd rather draw it with Hagatha. There's lots of things you'd rather draw other ways. Dazzler, you'd rather draw with the location.
Yeah. Hagatha is the exception because Hagatha is so important to get on curve that you don't want to throw it back and try to draw the location. You want to make sure that you have Hagatha, but
Yep.
Yeah. Plus she doesn't really benefit from she doesn't come a turn earlier if you get her up from the location.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in terms of, we talked a little bit about some of the matchups. So versus aggro, this is actually where the matchups tend to be the most green. They're not necessarily, like Pirate Demon Hunter, it's a 55 to 45. Pain Warlock, 58. Insanity Warlock, it's not really an aggro deck, but 58. And so, we tend to do pretty well into the aggro types of decks, and basically you just need to bridge to your Frosty Decor and or your Cliff Dive. So like save your coin. If you're on the coin, you might actually want to save it so that you can really get those online when you need them. And even take a little bit of extra hits at the early game if you know that they're not going to actually just straight up kill you. Obviously, a Pain Warlock, you need to make sure they don't just kill you on 4.
Yeah.
But usually they're not going to kill you before you have a chance to at least get Frosty Decor online, and that will really slow them down, especially if you got Hagatha. It's worth taking the time to play the location while they're building their board again, because that just, like, it gets you your Hagatha, it gets you, even if it just gets you Dazzler, that's good counter pressure. It makes your Cliff Dive better because you're not pulling your Dazzlers or your Hagatha out of your Cliff Dive, so...
Yeah, and against all the time, but against aggro specifically, remember that spell damage totem is a thing. Because that sometimes they will often ignore it, because who wants to send 2 damage into a totem when they could be hitting you in the face? And that makes your Malted Magma do 2 across the board, and it turns your Pop-Up Book into a lightning bolt. So do pay attention to that. That can often help you clear things that you wouldn't have been able to clear otherwise. So sometimes, like you toteming, getting a spell damage totem, a Pirate Demon Hunter ignores it, they play a monkey, and you can kill the monkey with two swings of the Malted Magma. So do just keep an eye out for that and make sure that you're accounting for your damage calculations with that in mind if you do have it on board.
Yeah. And that might be one place where if I know I'm facing aggro, I'll be a little bit more discerning about when I play my Pop-Up Book and when I play my Malted Magma.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, don't just throw that out for Dazzler versus an aggro deck. You actually use it to clear something. At least think harder about just throwing it out for Dazzler.
Yeah, that's more for decks that you're playing against that you're going to play Dazzler on curve, and you're almost never playing Dazzler on curve into an aggro deck unless you have nothing better to do.
Right. You want to be Cliff Diving because, Cliff Dive, if it pulls you, or, just play the Golganeth straight.
Yeah.
But like, if it pulls you Golganeth, if it pulls you Walking Mountain, if it pulls you Yogg even, like, you're pretty set, especially if you can do it again the next turn. And the Walking Mountain will heal you to full.
Yeah.
From almost anything. So, versus a big Spell Mage, we are actually slightly favored, although I don't know how that changes with the Orb build. But including all of the time since the mini set came out, it's a 55.5% favored for the big Shaman. If they get the absolute nuts, then they got the absolute nuts, right? But they're, especially now that we have the Skyla buff, they're unlikely to get Tsunami online before turn 5, which is also when you're hitting Frosty Decor. Or if you're on the coin, you might be hitting Cliff Dive. So you do have ways to respond, and sometimes you actually can kind of run them out of stuff. I think that might be something where the Orb build is harder to do that with.
Yeah.
But with the spike build, you can just kind of like keep dealing with it, keep making builds with Dazzler, keep clearing like 1-3 AoE at a time, you know. And you have lots of little random dudes that end up on the board that soak hits from the water elementals. Do remember that Walking Mountain, once it gets frozen, it can't finish its attacks. So, however, one thing that I have learned is that if, let's say, your second attack is into a water elemental and then you freeze, but there's still minions on the board that you could have hit if you hadn't frozen. You missed your next turn. You missed your next attack, but that should have been this turn. So when you hit the end turn button, you unfreeze.
Yeah. So if you like use the first 3 attacks, right, and freeze on the third one, you're still gonna unfreeze at the end of that turn.
Right.
That's if you played it honestly, though. Not if you're cliff diving, right? Because if you're cliff diving, then it's gonna unfreeze and then go back in your deck.
Well, yeah, I tended to get into really long games versus the big spell mage. Yeah.
Right.
Right. If you're cliff diving, it goes back into your deck. It's not frozen. It's back in your deck.
Or gets evolved.
Or it gets evolved.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Right.
Yeah.
Then you want to hit as many. If you're cliff diving it, you just want to hit as many things as possible before you can stop. Like hit the water elementals last because you're only going to get to hit one.
Which is not how you want things to go when you're actually cliff diving for real. So that's a little bit ironic.
Hit the water last.
Yes.
Don't hit the water. Well, it's because it's ice. You don't want to hit ice.
You don't want to hit as many things as possible on the way down when you're cliff diving for real. So.
Also, against a mage, just assume that you're going to be frozen and not able to use your horn unless you have very good reason to believe otherwise. Like, if you have an opportunity to hit face with that thing, then you might as well go for it, but don't expect to be able to do it next turn. Like, you're not. So don't, prioritize going for the horn. You're trying to deal with the tsunami. You're trying to get a wide board. Because you're just going to be frozen every turn from turn 5 on.
Yeah,
Just
swinging is a
assume that.
treat. Swinging is a treat. Yeah.
But if you happen to not be, then, it's not terrible in the late game to go just horn skirting death. For
if you make it to turn 9, then trying to set up if any turn you ever don't freeze me, you're just dead. Right. Like, that can be good, because they don't have a lot of taunt necessarily unless they got it off of Sunset Volley.
Yeah. And I guess the same, not necessarily against Big Spell Mage, but the same kind of idea with Walking Mountain goes for Unkillax. Like, remember that has poison and it will kill your Walking Mountain. So you want to hit anything, which is difficult because the Unkillax has taunt, but be aware of that also when you're trying to clear the Unkillax, is that the poison is going to... And it cancels out the Mega Wind Fury. We'll just say it that way.
And it won't even go back in your deck.
No.
If you can get the first part down and then you have Malted Magma, that's a good way to clear the Unkillax. Because you can get the Reborn, Divine Shield Reborn with a Malted Magma. Although that's expensive, but it does work.
Yeah. So it's really just Warrior that's playing Unkillax. Everyone else is just playing the twin Lifesteal 6/5s for the most part.
Some druids still.
Ugh.
I think it's just like a preference thing.
Yeah, and those are our worst matchups, are the things that play Unkillax.
Unsurprising.
Odin Warrior is the worst one. Luckily, not very common, but it's a 32% win rate, which is...
Yeah.
I have not seen one yet.
We're not very good at doing more than 30 damage. Not very good at that. So that's the problem, is like an Odin Warrior is like more than 30 damage dot deck. So you're just not getting there.
We're basically saying, hey, I have bigger stuff than you. And if they're like, I don't have stuff, I just kill your stuff.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah, you just try to pressure the best you can and hope they don't have the right clears at the right time, I think, is basically what you do in that situation. Druids is a little bit better, but still not our favorite. You do have ways of dealing with their big stuff. If they're not I found, unfortunately, they're more going to Reno. I found that harder than just the straight.
Yeah. Reno is a big bummer, especially because all of your things make other minions. So like there's very little that you can do on that Reno turn other than, I don't know, hard playing a Kolagarn or a Walking Mountain, but that just feels
horn,
horrible.
If you have the horn.
Yeah. Like there are things you can do, but it's not great. And just like your whole game plan in the mid to late game is just sticking a big board and hitting him in the face with it. And then Reno just completely nullifies all of that.
But I think, you just play to still, maybe hold a Dazzler, have some reload for after the turn after the Reno. You can definitely get there. You can sometimes go quite long with this. If they're making their big stuff slow enough, sometimes you can just deal with it.
Yeah.
Especially like a Dragon Druid. I'd say not most of the time. It's not our favorite matchup, but
yeah.
You don't need to auto concede.
Yeah. I think the problem with a lot of these decks in general is just that they're all running Marin, and it is very hard. Like you can deal with like a big thing, but it is not easy for this deck to be able to cancel out 30 mana worth of stuff.
Unless you hit specifically Yogg.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So definitely be aware that you're going to try to need to hit specifically Yogg in that situation.
Or win with an early Razzle Dazzler.
Or win with an early Razzle Dazzler, which sometimes you can do. Handbuff Paladin is quite a favored matchup, actually. They go tall, but you can put little taunts in the way. You can clear things. You can maybe steal it with Yogg or with Kolagharn if you're running that. And they're not very good at dealing with wide Handbuff Paladins because they usually don't run something like Keeper's Strength. So you hardly ever see that. So you can just kind of play your Dazzler, go wide. They do have lifesteal, but you can just keep a board that's hard for them to deal with. And then put little taunts in the way that they have to hit through.
Yeah. And they take about as long to get set up as you do. So like by the time that they're really fully online, you're also going into your turn 6. So then you can Yogg with a Cliff Dive, or you can take out a lot of their board with a Walking Mountain. Or a Golganeth will do a lot of work. Like there's a lot of things that you can do by the time that they're getting ramped up that kind of keeps you on pace with them pretty well.
Yeah. We've mentioned a lot of these card notes. Lots of things.
Yeah. I kind of think that basically covers it.
The only one that we didn't mention is that like if you have a Golganeth stick for a while, look at what's left in your deck before you click on draw 3 overload spells and decide if you really want them or not. Because a lot of the time it's 2 Walking Mountains and maybe a Turn the Tides. And if you still have a Cliff Dive that you have left to play, you probably want to play that before you draw the overload cards, because that's a lot of the value that you're giving up on the second Cliff Dive by drawing those out. It doesn't happen often, but I've done it and I've been sad. So I'd like you to be a little bit less sad than I was.
I have occasionally evolved, like Muck Pool's a Golganeth that had, that was on its third thing because I didn't want to use the location, and now it's just taking up, I didn't want to draw the Walking Mountains. Now it's just taking up a board slot. It might as well be a random 7 drop.
Yeah.
So, but sometimes if you have already drawn the things or you've already used your Cliff Dives, then it, at least it's drawing it out of your deck so you can draw something else. Like, then it's fine. Obviously easier if you have a deck tracker. But if you don't, basically, if you haven't played both, if you don't have a deck tracker, if you haven't played both Cliff Dives, probably don't draw your overload cards.
That's a fair thumb. That's a fair rubric. Yes.
Well, that's gonna do it. Go out there and play some big minions. We have many folks we'd like to thank. Check out the thanks section on the website at coinconcede.com, where you can also find our contact info or show notes and our Patreon information. You can monetarily support our show at patreon.com/coinconcede. Join us every week live by following us on Twitch at twitch.coinconcede.com. Join our community chats in our Discord at discord.coinconcede.com, and write into our email at coinconcede@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at coinconcede, and if you would like some CC swag, head on over to our shop at shop.coinconcede.com. Coinconcedes. I guess you're the one who's written stuff, so.
All right. Basically, tons of people who made the wedding work. It was a lot of work from my husband and me, but it was also a lot of work from a lot of other people. And my sister and my niece did my hair and makeup. They did an incredible job. I'm very grateful. This is not something that I am super knowledgeable about myself. So I really appreciate, they looked at the makeup that I brought and were like, nah, on all of it. But they were correct. And the stuff that they had worked much better. And it just worked out really well. I really appreciate it. My mom totally went all out on the decorations for the church. My mother-in-law hosted people in her house every single day for the whole weekend. My aunt was the officiant and did a great job, helped me with the ceremony. And we had a friend who was like looking after the young people. There was a couple people there. The hotel where we had the reception did a really nice job. The baker did a nice job. Thanks to the photographer and everybody who came. And my husband, most of all, for being awesome. And yeah, and to you two for holding down the fort on the show last week. And to all the listeners for, everyone has been very kind in the congratulations. Oh, and also to I think I still have 2 people I haven't reached out for coaching. Sorry about that.
It's not like you had anything else going on, so,
Well, I'm going to concede to Smarms for inviting me to join on Blizznet this very evening. It actually was going to be last week, but late. And I was like, I can't start a podcast at 1 a.m. That's not doable.
You've changed, Edel. Like,
I know. No longer am I the person who played in an America's tournament from Jerusalem by staying up all night and started at midnight and I finished at like 7 or 8. Yeah. Anyway, so we're doing tonight 11:30 Eastern, which is still late but more manageable. And they're doing over on Blizzlet. They do this each year. They invite female guests to join them. They had May on earlier in the month, which was pretty awesome. It's their Badass Women of Hearthstone month, and they give their earnings from Patreon for that month to, I forget the organization. I want to say Women Who Code, but I could totally be wrong about that. Yes! Ha! I was correct. All proceeds going to Girls Who Code. Wow, I remembered a thing. That's great. So, it will probably be out before the regular version of this show because Daniel gets on top of editing faster than I do.
Does he not sleep? Like, what?
I don't know. I mean, he doesn't do as in-depth as I do either, I don't think.
He has a day job.
He does.
I mean, chaos is part of that show, I think. So
True.
you just leave in the chaos.
Yeah, that's also fair.
Meanwhile, I don't even want to know how many markers are in today's show. It's a lot.
I kept talking over Wicked. I'm sorry, Wicked.
That's okay. We're both excited.
We just got to get the 3-host groove back, you know?
Yeah. We all need to get out. We need to just all 3 of us get out of all of our stuff, and then which we're almost there. So,
yeah.
Well, I will coin concede to CDC because he was nice enough to reach out to me this week and help me figure out some things that I needed to figure out. And so, don't want to get into any details, but it was a very helpful conversation to help me put some things into line that I was struggling with. So, nice. And I appreciate him, even if I'm not able to be in his stream as often, and he has not been able to be in my stream because those streams have not existed. But I appreciate him, and it's good to have friends who will check on you when they haven't heard from you in a while. So, that is going to do it for us for this week. So until next time, keep calm and hit things when you're cliff diving. And if you see us on ladder, coin concede.
Coin concede.
Coin concede.
All life must end. I yield for now. I concede. Well fought. I concede.
You win this one.
The victory is yours.
You have bested me.
I give up.
You win this one, friend. You win this time. I choose death.